Hello everyone! Thanks for coming by to hear what else I saw in May that I haven't already told you about. Movie number 1 is 1994's Blown Away. Jeff Bridges plays a bomb disposal expert forced to confront his past when Tommy Lee Jones's Irish terrorist escapes from prison and comes after Bridges' friends and family. This is a very 90s action movie, and since it's set in Boston, you can expect some questionable accents, although the one I wondered about the most was Tommy Lee Jones's Irish brogue, which I thought had a touch of Russian to it, at least the first few times I heard him speak. It was different to see him on the villainous side of a cat-and-mouse game, and I'm not sure I liked it. His terrorist is gleefully demented, creepy, but somehow not entirely detestable, using kids' toys to design whimsical Rube Goldberg-type explosive devices. The use of POV shots and extreme close-ups on these contraptions really ups the tension while adding cool visuals. Jeff Bridges gets to work with his dad Lloyd Bridges, who plays his uncle, while Forrest Whitaker co-stars as a cocky newbie. This was an okay movie. I wasn't keen on it at first, but it pulls you in, and my mom found it very tense. There are plenty of explosions, crazy stunts, and imaginative setups to keep things exciting. It's a bit cookie-cutter in retrospect, but the things that seem cliché now probably weren't quite so overdone when this was released in 1994. Movie number 2 is 1952's Stranger on the Prowl. Set in post-war Italy, Paul Muni plays a tramp wanted for murder who ends up being followed by a little boy who mistakenly thinks the police are after him. This reminded me a little bit of Roberto Rossellini's films, but even more of 1948's Bicycle Thieves. So much so that I had to wonder if that was a direct influence on this film, or if the similarities are just born out of a common setting. Stranger on the Prowl, directed by blacklisted Joseph Losey and released in Italy as Imbarco a Mezzanotte, is a picture of a battered city where the tired and poor grow desperate and morality assumes a dingy gray pallor. Muni's tramp doesn't say much, but he's intense. It's never clear if we should fear him or feel for him, as his own behavior has a tendency to be volatile, but his actions seem more involuntary than intentional, like an outburst of his hopelessness. I was reminded of one of his most famous movies, 1932's I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, where his character fades into the darkness whispering the line, "I steal." One can imagine that the unnamed man here is that same fugitive 10 plus years later. I found he was overshadowed, however, by the boy Giacomo, who is the true main character, a little hoodlum in training who just wants to go to the circus and who doesn't fully understand what's going on in his life. The boy is played by Vittorio Minuta, and American Joan Loring co-stars as a local girl caught in the middle. The film is a downer, but it's pretty good. Movie number 3 is 1950's Dark City, a noirish thriller in which the members of a gambling racket find themselves becoming targets after they fleece an innocent man. This was a decent movie, though I didn't necessarily enjoy the story, the subject matter, or the characters we had to deal with. There's a lot of cynicism and cold-bloodedness among both the good guys and the not-so-good guys. It's an early role for Charlton Heston, who gets an introducing credit, even though he'd been around for a couple years. He's more of an anti-hero than a true blue protagonist, while leading Lady Elizabeth Scott's melancholy torch singer and hanger-on spends most of her screen time sending him longing glances. The rest of the cast includes Vivica Lindfors, Don DeFore, he's especially good, Dean Jagger as a tenacious cop, Ed Begley Sr., and fans of Dragnet will be tickled to see both Jack Webb and Harry Morgan together. What I liked about this movie is that it's a crime drama that also dabbles in horror. As the situation shifts off-kilter and characters find themselves being stalked, the audio and visuals are used to create a surprisingly spooky atmosphere. This adds something special to a film that otherwise could have been a run-of-the-mill revenge tale. Movie number 4 is a rewatch for me, 2017's Dunkirk. Christopher Nolan's depiction of the mass evacuation of British soldiers stranded on the French beaches as German forces close in. Nolan applies his taste for non-linear storytelling by showing the action unfold, sometimes multiple times, from three perspectives: land, sea, and air, or soldiers, civilian boat crew, and fighter pilots. I watched this a few years ago, probably about a year after it came out and everyone was raving about it, and I struggled with it. I don't remember exactly what I said in my mini review, but I know I had a hard time following the complicated narrative and keeping track of who was who and where and when. As is often the case with Nolan films, a lot of the dialogue was hard to understand, and I felt like, why can't he just tell a straightforward story? That annoyed me, and I may have even chanced incurring the wrath of Nolan fanboys by using the word overrated. I'm not sure, I didn't go back and rewatch the mini review, but that word may have come up. But for a while now, I felt I ought to give it another shot. And when I found out it was on Prime a couple weeks ago, I said to my parents, hey, this is out there, should we go for it? And they said, yeah, okay. And I'm really glad that we did, because I liked it so much better this time. I might even say I loved it, except I'm not sure that I'm ready for that. There were things I remembered from before, and that absolutely helped, but on this viewing, I did a much better job of locking on to key details, so following it wasn't nearly as difficult. There were things that would come up and I'd make a mental note, like when they first mentioned the Minesweeper, and then when it came up a second time, and that helped me keep that whole sequence of events, jumbled up as it may seem, straight. And that made it so much more impactful. And I made note of differences in the pilots' costumes so I could tell which was which. I realized the film's not as disjointed as it previously seemed. And then, because I was never lost, I was better able to appreciate the themes, the emotions, the turning points, the subtleties in certain performances, and the brilliance of the climax when everything comes together. As for the audio problem, we had the volume cranked up nice and loud, and I got much more of the dialogue. I didn't understand every line, but I got the bulk of it. Plus, every explosion, bullet crack, whistling bomb, roaring plane engine, and splintering piece of wood was enhanced. Since watching the movie the first time, I've seen several depictions of the Dunkirk evacuation, but I still found myself glued to the screen from start to finish. Overall, I found it an incredibly satisfying and rewarding experience. Movie number 5 is 1949's The Crooked Way, a noir in which John Payne plays a war veteran with a piece of shrapnel stuck in his head that's caused him to lose his memory. His doctor sends him back to what is believed to be his home in Los Angeles, hoping someone will recognize him and provide his backstory. People do recognize him immediately, but in a "what are you doing here? I figured you'd never show your face in this town again" way, and he soon finds himself steeped in trouble, going up against a murderous thug. I've just given you quite a bit of summary to make up for the fact I don't have much in terms of commentary to offer. From early on, I wasn't really feeling this one, not the story, not the characters, and then I dozed through a good deal of it, so I can't really review this one. Sorry! Movie number 6 is 2003's Alien Hunter, when a strange object trapped in ice is found in Antarctica and begins emitting an unidentifiable signal. James Spader's cryptologist is brought in to try to decode it, but the ice is thawing fast, and what's inside may be deadly. I definitely felt some deja vu watching this. It's one of those movies that frequently reminds you of other movies. There's one part where they show a clip of a videotape, but my mom and I looked at each other and we were like, that's definitely from The Thing from Another World. Like, either it's a tape it's a clip from The Thing, or it's a recreation, but it is spot on from that movie. You can respond to this in two different ways. You can say, this isn't very original, it's just a ripoff of X, Y, and Z. Or you can say, nice, this has things in common with all these other movies I like. I think my mom falls into the latter category, while I struggle not to dwell in the former category. Keir Dullea appears in some scenes as, I believe, the Secretary of Defense. The film kept cutting away from the main group to Washington, D.C., and I wondered if this part was bulked up just because they were like, we got Dave from 2001, let's write more material for him. But then I noticed that the characters in Washington are the ones interacting with the Russian characters. That brings in that whole plot line, which I won't spoil. And I noticed in the end credits that I'll say 80% of the crew members were Russian, or they had Russian names. So I suspect that that whole part of the story was bulked up because of that, because in some way this was a Russian production. That's just my guess. I didn't do any research on this at all. The supporting cast also includes John Lynch playing a massive jerk and Anthony Crivello playing a lesser jerk. I mention Crivello because I know him from a bunch of musicals. I'm familiar with the sound of his voice, not so much with what he looks like. So it was funny to see him in a sci-fi horror movie. It wasn't especially good. The film as a whole, well, it was okay. Between recycled elements and moments that felt like filler, it did seem to have some trouble being its own thing. Credit where it's due, though. It doesn't go in the direction I'd assumed it was going, and it has some decent effects, though they probably seemed better in 2003. Movie number 7 is 1981's The Bunker. This TV movie recounts the last days of Adolf Hitler and his inner circle, starting when he relocates to the bunker in January 1945. Hitler is played by Anthony Hopkins, and it's interesting, there were plenty of times when I felt very aware that I was watching Hopkins play Hitler. There were unmistakable Anthony Hopkins-isms. But there were also times when he would disappear, and I was like, yep, that's the guy. When he's not blowing a gasket at his generals, this Hitler is plagued with insecurity and illness, his physical and mental deterioration undeniable, although ardent supporters do try to deny it. Something that would probably appall today's oversensitive viewers is that Hopkins gives Hitler some humanity, showing his loyalty, affection, and vulnerability. It's got a good supporting cast as well, including Julian Fellowes and Edward Hardwicke, Piper Laurie as Magda Goebbels, who is both warm and cold at the same time, and Susan Blakely as an appealingly frivolous Ava Braun. One of the major characters is Hitler's chief architect, Albert Speer, who rebels against Hitler's scorched earth policy. He's played by Richard Jordan, and I thought he was especially good. The movie in general, while long, and it certainly felt long in the last 15 minutes as things petered out, was definitely worthwhile, and I didn't mind that the accents were all over the place, as if the director said, if you want to do a German accent, you can, but if you want to keep your natural accent, that's fine too. For the most part, it works. I did notice it, but it didn't bother me. The only performance that I felt stood out in a negative way was Cliff Gorman as Goebbels. Unlike Himmler and Goering, he didn't look the part to me, and as he spewed his venom against Jews and capitalism, he had a distinct American accent that I found distracting. This film is overshadowed now by 2004's Downfall, the German film starring Bruno Ganz, but it is an engrossing drama with some chilling moments and a throbbing score that perpetuates the sense of unease. Movie number 8 is, I guess, a rewatch, or a partial rewatch, 1965's Redbeard. Yuzo Kayama plays a young doctor who's upset when, instead of the cushy appointment he was hoping for, he is sent to a struggling clinic in a poor area to serve under Toshiro Mifune's unconventional doctor. I had seen what I thought was most of this a couple years ago, but the movie's 3 hours long, so if I saw half of it, that means there are 90 minutes that I didn't see. That could be a whole other movie. That's longer than a couple of the movies on this list. So I've always meant to go back and catch what I missed. It's been a few years though, so I just watched the whole thing. This was Mifune's final collaboration with director Akira Kurosawa, and it wasn't a happy one. Production dragged on, with the actor's frustrations mounting, and afterward he severed what had been a tremendously fruitful partnership. But none of this shows in his performance as the fierce but compassionate Dr. Niime. I believe this is the second Mifune film I saw, and prior to this, I had formed a certain idea of the kind of actor he was based on his performance in Throne of Blood, a movie that I didn't really like. But then I saw him here, so gentle and patient and subtle, and it showed a whole other side, a side I liked much better. But Yuzo Kayama more than holds his own as the headstrong young medical student, and Yoshio Tsuchiya is also good as the third Doctor. The film has an overarching narrative, but it's composed of vignettes, each focusing on a specific case. Some stories are tragic, but there's a prevailing optimism and hope that no matter how dark a situation may be, it can improve. I was a bit shocked by one big scene I had missed before, involving a young woman who's been injured, and her organs, it's kind of graphic, it's kind of violent, it's got harrowing implications, and boy, does it make its point. And there are a number of memorable episodes like that. The insane woman trying to seduce and kill the doctor, the guy with the tinkling bells that ring every time he moves, the epic fight in the street with the bones sticking out, the girl who's rescued from the brothel and all they have to do to rehabilitate her, the women calling into the well. It is a bit overwhelming when you go back and consider it all. It's a lot for one film, but it holds together nicely. Movie number 9 is a rewatch, 1957's The Bridge on the River Kwai. British soldiers ordered to surrender arrive at a POW camp where they're forced to build a bridge for their Japanese captors. Often hailed one of the greatest World War II films ever made, this epic from director David Lean stars William Holden, Alec Guinness, Jack Hawkins, Sessue Hayakawa, and James Donald. The film's last line is madness, and that aptly summarizes some of what goes on here. There are moments where you find yourself saying, they're gonna do what? Alec Guinness is splendid as the British colonel, a career military man who puts great stock in integrity, decorum, and honor, qualities that can become endangered when you're suffering in a POW camp, but his rigid sense of what is right leads to conflict with many other characters. Holden's crafty and disillusioned American commander, James Donald's pragmatic medic, and the ruthless Japanese Colonel Saito, played by Hayakawa, who finds in Guinness a formidable opponent. Guinness's Colonel is a fascinating character, forging ahead with his questionable purpose to the point that the film assumes a sense of unreality. You struggle to understand if he just has extremely noble intentions, or if he's gone a little insane. Now here's the hard part. I must confess, reluctantly, I don't love this movie as much as I feel I am supposed to, or expected to, especially as someone who loves classic war movies. Now, let me be clear, I like it just fine, and I fully appreciate how well executed it is. But I've seen it twice now, and both times I wanted to come away considering it a favorite, and both times I didn't. I think a lot of this has to do with the climax, which is awesome, until a couple things happen that leave me scratching my head. I've revisited this big moment multiple times, and there's just something off to me. Something contrived and unconvincing or unsatisfying. I also feel there are some slow spots in the middle. But for the most part, I do find it engaging, and it's a magnificent movie. The scenery's great, the performances are great, the use of Colonel Bogey's march, of course, is iconic, and it features one of the most famous explosions in cinematic history. As the characters themselves would say, jolly good show. Movie number 10 is 1953's From Here to Eternity. An Army bugler and ex-boxer, Montgomery Clift, transfers to another unit where he's pressured to join their boxing team. His adamant refusal is met with harassment and punishment from the CO. Meanwhile, Burt Lancaster's sergeant pursues a clandestine relationship with his captain's wife, Deborah Carr. The setting is Hawaii, 1941. I'd seen a bit of this before, not enough for me to have an official opinion, but enough for me to not be interested in seeing the whole thing. But it's a popular movie that makes a ton of lists, so before it left the Criterion Channel last month, I decided to give it an official viewing. Well, I was right. I didn't like it, and for what it's worth, my mom doesn't like it either. She'd seen it before and wasn't thrilled to see it again. She doesn't like watching the relentless bullying and harassment and what comes of it, and I didn't like that either. Yes, that's frustrating and unfair, and it made me angry, but that was only part of it. This just isn't my kind of war movie. I guess it's more of a military movie than a war movie, but it's still just... the subject matter just didn't appeal to me. It's all about relationship drama and hot-headed guys showing off, fooling around, getting drunk, getting in trouble, which I expect to a certain extent, and I can tolerate that, but when that's what the whole movie is, I'm not interested. I tend to skip those movies. The Pearl Harbor part doesn't come until close to the end. It's very short, it includes a lot of stock footage, and it's pivotal, but it's more or less peripheral. So to call this one of the top Pearl Harbor movies, quite frankly, I find that ridiculous. And another thing, people rave about how sexy the beach scene is, calling it one of the hottest movie kisses ever, one of the best love scenes, but I found the entire extramarital affair plot completely unromantic and unappealing. I hate storylines like this. Burt Lancaster does nothing for me, and now I know that people just take that moment out of context and ignore the rest of the scene. Now that I've got a lot of people very angry at me, let me say, technically speaking, yes, it is a good movie, and I understand why it won a whopping 8 Academy Awards, and why it's still lauded today. It's got a star-studded cast, and all the actors perform their ambiguous roles well. Deborah Carr and Donna Reed play against type, and that's noteworthy. And I guess my favorite parts, well, this is going to sound lame, but my favorite parts were the moments when Clift bugled. The sound was actually dubbed by a professional bugler, but to his credit, Clift still spent months learning the instrument so his playing would look authentic. And it did. The writing has a sharpness to it, the characters are well developed, and the story doesn't shy away from controversy and grim subject matter. I just didn't enjoy pretty much anything about it. Movie number 11 is 1938's Always Goodbye. Barbara Stanwyck plays a young woman whose fiancé is killed on his way to marry her. Turns out she's pregnant, and when she encounters kindly Herbert Marshall, he helps her through having the baby and giving him up for adoption to a good couple. 5 years later, she encounters the boy in France. They form a mutual attachment, and she struggles to give him up again. This is the second Stanwyck and Marshall collaboration I've seen, the first being 1937's Breakfast for Two, which I remember liking, but I also remember that there was a slapstick scene where Marshall slips and falls on the floor, and it was, well, it's very unusual for him, and I guess it was funny, but I just remember being worried. You're not supposed to be worried about an actor when you're watching a screwball comedy. They're both good here, and Stanwyck delivers the sentiment. Her bond with the little boy is very sweet, but the story is a predictable one. She can't resist forcing herself into this situation, and it's crazy that she doesn't anticipate the outcome. What's even crazier is the way the movie ends. On one level, it works. It's like, well, that's the best possible solution, I guess. But at the same time, it's kind of messed up. Stanwyck, who never had any biological children herself, played a devoted mother who makes a sacrifice for her child in Stella Dallas. 1 year later, she does the same thing here. But whereas Stella Dallas's ending always makes me weepy, This had me saying, ooh, I don't know about this. The saving grace, and maybe this is giving it away a bit, is that Ian Hunter's character is at least very likable. So you feel like, I guess things will be okay. I don't know what's going to happen 13 years from now, but alright! Movie number 12 is 1951's The Red Badge of Courage, John Huston's adaptation of the classic novel by Stephen Crane, in which a young soldier struggles with cowardice as he heads into his first battle of the American Civil War. I think I've read the book twice, at least one of those times was for school, and I found this a very good adaptation. I don't love the book, I found it a little boring sometimes, but this doesn't labor the point. It's under 70 minutes long, and it keeps things moving. I liked the way it was photographed. There's something modern about the close-ups and the camera's fluidity, which aligns nicely with the book's timelessness and universality. It's got a good cast, led by Audie Murphy in one of his earliest roles. His casting as the cowardly youth is surprising, given that Murphy, before he became an actor, was famous for being the most decorated soldier of World War II, but considering his own intense battlefield experience, this is a role he was certainly qualified to interpret. This is a few years before he reenacted his own heroic feats in To Hell and Back. Moreover, I think he gives a good, natural performance. I admit I've always found the character in the book kind of twerpy, always talking tough in a desperate bid to conceal his fear from the other guys. But he's relatable for all that, and I think Murphy does a fine job bringing this out. I've passed on this one several times, but I suddenly had a whim to watch it for Memorial Day, and I'm glad I did, because I liked it. And movie number 13 is 1949's Shockproof. Patricia Knight plays a parolee who's just completed a 5-year sentence. Her parole officer, Cornell Wilde, does everything he can to help relaunch her into society, including giving her a strict order not to see her gambler boyfriend. But that's an order she insists on breaking. This is a noirish thriller directed by Douglas Sirk, with Samuel Fuller's name attached as co-writer, and I really liked it. Or at least I found it engaging, and I liked most of it. It didn't start out as I expected, it didn't follow the trajectory I expected, and it had a twist I didn't see coming, which kept things exciting. It probably helps that I hardly knew anything about the movie before watching it. The downside is I felt the last quarter dragged, and the ending was kind of clumsy, but the execution up to that point was fine. I didn't know this while watching, but Cornell Wilde and Patricia Knight were actually married at the time, although he is better known for his collaborations with his second wife, Jean Wallace. I thought both Wilde and Knight were good here. She has a sharpness to her face that makes her kind of an unusual leading lady for the time, but it serves her well as this bitter, unsure character. It was also nice to see Esther Minciotti in her first film appearance as Wilde's mother. She's most famous for playing Ernest Borgnine's mom in Marty. This was a pretty good film all around, and I would say the less you know about it going in, the better. And that's what else I saw in May. I hope you enjoyed this collection of mini reviews. I managed to get some classics in there, as well as a couple movies from this century. Whoa! Let me know what you think of any of these titles in the comments below. You can find the titles listed in the description, along with some links where applicable. And I will be back next weekend with another review. Thanks for watching.